I am here with a really good friend of mine, Andy. Hello, Andy.
Hello. How are
Now,
you?
his voice you might recognise from the '90s tunes. We're not here to talk about that today, but also you've got the same initials as me, which makes quite good fun on the presenters chat group. But hello,
Yep.
Andy Brown from '90s tunes fame.
Hello, Andy B of Pure 24/7 Radio fame.
There you are.
Nice to see you.
Now, we wanted to delve into your sight loss because, on the surface of it, people meet you. They may not know you've got any struggles with your vision on your sight because there's
Yep.
nothing obviously apparent. You haven't got
Yep.
blacked out glasses. People might meet you with a cane, but you may not have that. So it's possible people will meet you and have no clue, which I think is an interesting point to start because a lot of people's struggles, disabilities, whatever we might want to call them, they're not always immediately apparent, are they?
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, often as blind people, sometimes as people say to us, you don't look blind. And then you kind of have to unpack that a little bit and think, well, what does that actually mean? And like you say, there's the kind of the classic blind look with the sunglasses and the white cane. I brought the white cane with me just in case of a bit of a prop, but it's so I do use a white cane, and I do sometimes wear sunglasses if the sun is bright, but sometimes I walk around, particularly places I know really well, without a white stick and without sunglasses, and you perhaps wouldn't know that I have any kind of issues with my sight whatsoever.
Which is a good reason why we shouldn't make this the sweeping assumption that, yep, they're fine, or what's wrong with you. Another classic would be you see somebody parked in a disabled bay, they get out of the car and start walking. Well, you're not possibly disabled. Two things: one, they could be the carer, so that
Yep.
they're not going to necessarily have any disabilities or struggles. And two, it could be a good day for that person who might struggle to walk 50 yards. And do you know what?
Absolutely.
This is a day they can walk 50 yards and you wouldn't notice. And that's why
Yeah.
it's so important not to make those sort of sweeping generalizations, those looking at the picture and deciding what's in the book stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. And actually carrying something like a white cane is quite difficult because it does feel like it creates something of a stigma. You do feel like people are looking at you. I mean, if you're totally blind, which I'm not, but if you're totally blind, then obviously you can't necessarily see that people are looking at you. But yeah, for someone like me, so I am blind, but I have some sight, and because a lot of people don't realize that being blind doesn't necessarily mean you can't see anything at all. There's kind of a range, a bit of a spectrum in terms of what you can see. So you might hear the phrase partially sighted, visually impaired, low vision. There's a bit of a debate in the blindness community about what's the most appropriate term. But yeah, for someone like me, actually carrying a white cane was quite a big step for me. And particularly when I go into London commuting for work, it's helpful to have, but it also can make you feel a bit vulnerable in different situations. So it's a big deal. So if you don't need to carry one, you probably wouldn't. And if you never have, it might be an interesting experiment for you to walk around with one and see what kind of reaction you get from people.
I have watched stuff like, for example, they took somebody who's in their 20s, 30s, they fitted them with this sort of exoskeleton thing that
Mhm.
slowed down every movement they have to mimic that of an 80-year-old. And when they went to cross a road, it literally slows them down to the pace of what an 80-year-old might do. And they were quite scared how long it took to do everything because, of course, until you're in that situation, you don't
Yep.
really know about it. And they were
Yep.
walking across the road thinking, gosh, these drivers are getting really aggressive. They can feel them wanting them to get out of the way and realizing, do you know what? These 80-year-olds who are crossing the road slowly, actually, they're going pretty quickly. But
Yep.
their quick isn't necessarily our quick because they're 60 years our senior.
Yeah. Yeah. And unless you're in that situation, unless you experience it yourself, it's that walking a mile in someone else's shoes, isn't it? Because
Mm.
it's really hard to imagine. And for a lot of people, particularly with sight loss, it's really, really difficult to imagine what that's like. I don't recommend you close your eyes and walk around for a few days to see what to get that experience. But yeah, unless you're going through it yourself, it's really hard. And actually, the other thing to bear in mind is that um, one person's sight loss is completely different to someone else's, even if they've got the same sight condition, because we all experience it differently. And I guess not all blindness is equal in the sense that, yeah, you might experience it one way, but I might experience it quite differently. So yeah, we should never really say, well, that person's blind and they can do X, Y, and Z. So why can't this other person? And it's just a lot of it comes from ignorance. And I don't mean that in a particularly derogatory way. I just mean, you know, if we haven't experienced it, how can we know? So there's quite a lot to learn about it, and I go through it myself. I've been through it, I've learned a lot, but I'm by no means an expert in the subject.
We don't know what we don't know is the basic
Yeah.
thing.
exactly, exactly.
Right. We want to talk about life and faith and stuff as well, because I know, because you're one of my close friends, that this wasn't a long-term thing from birth, so it isn't something that you don't have any other experience of, which is partly what I wanted to delve into a little bit. I've chatted to Dr. Trevor Stammers, who had pretty much immediate, permanent, full sight loss in one eye, then the other eye. So he had blindness essentially randomly in as much as his lifespan so far, and then it went. So he went through quite a very unique situation to him, which is kind of the point of what we're talking about. But let's go back a little bit in time, because life and faith is part of this. What
Yep.
was your journey of faith to the point, which I'm liking to ask this more and more, when the point at which you think, you know what, I'm going to follow Jesus Christ. I don't think it's just a nice idea. I don't just think this God thing could help. Actually, I want to follow Jesus Christ. What's your story grown up into that point?
Okay, so yeah, I didn't grow up in a Christian family, and you know, and that's not to say my parents were anti-Christian or anything like that. It just wasn't part of our lives. It's not something that we did. You know, we were baptized as infants, as babies, but that was about it. So yeah, I didn't really grow up with any experience of faith or the Bible or church even. But I think along the way, I guess if you'd have asked me, I probably would have said, yeah, I believe in God, and I guess I had a belief in some kind of God. I didn't really know him. I guess it was similar to, you know, I believe in Hawaii, but I've never been there. And it's that kind of thing, you know. I believed in a God of some sort for as long as I can remember. And when I was growing up, there was still kind of the creation story from the Bible was taught in schools, and that was, that was quite common. But yes, I remember as a really young child, kind of drawing the 7 days of creation in a little notebook, just because we'd been learning about it in school. But as I say, never really experienced faith. Never really went to church that much until later on, really. And I guess at about the age of around about 12 or so, I kind of made some friends at school who were Christians. And yeah, I don't know how we got onto the subject, but sooner or later we started talking about matters of faith, and a lot of what they said made a lot of sense to me. And as someone who kind of believed in God, but again had no real kind of frame of reference, it was, yeah, a lot of what they were telling me made sense. Probably the moment I would describe myself when I became a Christian was we went on a kind of a youth weekend away. The same group of Christian friends invited me along, and it wasn't necessarily a Christian weekend away. But we did all kinds of activities. You know, watching movies, hot chocolate. There was a really big assault course with, up to our waist in mud, and all kinds of fun activities like that. But I think it would have been probably the Saturday evening. A guy came to speak to us. He was expressing his faith, and he was giving us a bit of a gospel presentation, and he invited people to stand up. And if they wanted to become Christians, if they wanted to give their lives to Jesus, and he invited others who already were Christians to kind of stand up, and he would pray for them, for the Holy Spirit to visit them. And to be honest with you, looking back, I didn't really understand what he was saying. I didn't really fully grasp the gospel at that point. But I did stand up and I did say, in my own kind of way, yes to God. And that was the moment in my mind when I think I made a decision for Jesus. I made a decision for God, and yeah, and it was quite an interesting experience. Lots of people felt different things in that room that evening, and I often think back to that time. I think it was quite a special time. I didn't necessarily feel anything in particular. I don't know miraculous or special experiences like some others might have done. I remember I was quite afraid. I think, if I'm honest, I was kind of afraid because, like I say, I had no experience of God at all. But yeah, encountering Him in a very real way in that room was very powerful. Um, and then a few years down the line, I guess I took that experience home, and I would kind of, I would pray, not often, but I didn't even have a Bible to kind of read at this point. So, but I'd kind of followed God in my own way. But later on in life, I was able to go to church, get myself a Bible, read it, understand it, and really follow on. So although I think back to that point when I gave my life to Jesus, um, probably it was more of a journey rather than a once and done kind of decision, if that makes sense.
I think when you read any kind of testimony of somebody, it doesn't matter what their background is, it's often several years of moving from what you were to who you are becoming as you become a Christian and you start to follow God's way of doing things. But it's never even if someone has that amazing encounter of, of lights in the sky and all the rest of it that happens,
Yeah.
actually, even that generally it's part of a journey, and there's some more journey after it. So it isn't just a one time deal, is it?
No, absolutely, and I think we have to go through that experience. And I would want to test someone's position if they said, "Oh yeah, I made this decision for Jesus, and it was all fine and dandy." After that, I think, is that really real? I think it can be for some people, but actually, I think for the majority of people, it is a journey, and it's not just a one thing. We have to take time to think it through, and actually I think it's okay to doubt at times as well, to say, well, actually, what, do I believe this? What about this, what about that? And explore those, explore those with God as well, because I think, sometimes we're afraid perhaps to say, oh well, actually I'm struggling to believe this or that. But actually to take those doubts to God and to talk it through with him. I think he's big enough to accept that, and wants to help us understand. And I'd also say that my journey of faith, wasn't necessarily a journey of feelings or emotions or experiences like that, but actually it was quite a lot of thinking stuff through. I'm kind of a bit of a thinker. I like to ask questions and ponder, and actually come to a very rational understanding of faith, because as I think about faith, it's the only thing, the faith in Jesus, and the way the Bible sets out creation, and the way the Bible sets out how as people have kind of um, fallen to sinfulness, and how Jesus has rescued us through his work at the cross. Thinking about all of that, it makes sense to me, and logical sense, and nothing else really does to me. So that, yeah, so it isn't just a case of, I had an experience in a room one time, and therefore I believe in something supernatural, but it's much more logical than that, if that makes sense.
Um, the other thing that I think was interesting is your faith story and your sight loss. You weren't born with what you now have. So how did you suddenly realize? I'm not seeing things. That something's off here.
Yeah. So I guess when I was young, sort of 5, 6, that sort of age, I wore glasses, but a lot of children do. As our eyes kind of grow and adjust, that we need glasses to help us. But I guess at the age, and funny enough, sitting down for this interview is the first time I've kind of put two and two together. Really, a bit slow, but at roughly the same sort of time, about the age of 12, I began to have some struggles at school. So seeing the board at the front of the classroom, reading the textbooks, became a bit more and more difficult as time went on. I had to sit closer and closer to the board, moving nearer the front, and it became quite difficult. And so we went to the opticians. They referred us to the hospital. They had some ideas, did some tests about what it might be. And I was eventually referred to Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, very famous eye hospital in London. And I went there quite a bit, doing various tests, some of them quite unpleasant. I remember one time having a bright yellow dye being injected, and then they would try and take photos of the back of the eye so they could see what was going on. Also, I remember a time when I had to have electrodes put on my eyeballs to test the electrical activity in my eye while they did various tests, and that was quite unpleasant. I think it's fair to describe it that way. But I was eventually diagnosed with something called macular dystrophy. It's a genetic condition. So in a way, I was born with it because it was in my genes, but it didn't kind of appear until my teenage years. Um, I guess there's never a good time to lose your sight, but teenage years is particularly hard for most people anyway. But to lose your sight on top of that, it makes it quite challenging. Um, so yeah, in case anyone's not familiar, so there's a condition called AMD, which might be more common. It's age-related macular degeneration. It's where the sun damages the back of the retina, and people tend to get this loss of central vision. Mine's very similar to that in terms of, I've lost my central vision, but the cause is not the sun. It's a genetic cause that leads to the macula in the back of the eye as part of the retina to slowly die off. So I've got kind of a massive blind spot in the middle of my vision, really. So I'm looking at the camera now, but I can't actually see the camera. I can see everything around it, but yeah, so it kind of presents that way. So yeah, quite a difficult experience. I mean, I guess that the good thing about it is that it slowly deteriorated over time, which gave me plenty of time to adjust to it. as you say, some people lose their sight in an instant, perhaps because of an accident or an illness that strikes them, and that must be incredibly hard to adjust overnight. To opening your eyes one morning and finding that you can't see, that must be a terrible trauma for people. So although it was no fun to lose my sight in the way that I did, to do it slowly over time meant that I could adjust to it.
So you're developing this interest in faith, religion that becomes a relationship with Jesus. At the same time, you're starting to lose vision to some extent. How do those two fit together without you saying, "Yeah, but God, mine going blind, so no thanks"?
Yes. So looking back, I genuinely ask myself sometimes, if I hadn't lost my sight, would I be a Christian today? And I can only conclude the answer to that is no. And I can't prove that. There's no way to test that out, of course. But that is certainly my sense. And as I say, my interest in faith and interacting with these kind of Christian friends at school partly became about, I guess, because of losing my sight and moving around the classroom and sitting with them and them actually being willing to help me in a classroom setting, was really important to my faith journey. And I perhaps didn't recognize it at the time, but seeing them being willing to help me, and actually having my faith and learning to cope with my sight loss, my faith was incredibly helpful to that, because I could pray and I could ask God to help me, and when things got really difficult, I could talk to Him about it. So yeah, I often wonder, if I didn't lose my sight, would I have met that group of Christian friends? Would I have heard the gospel? These are all kind of ifs and buts and whatevers, but yeah, it certainly feels to me like there's a chance that I would never have found my way to Jesus, not if I hadn't lost my sight.
It's interesting because I think the immediate reaction is, well, you're starting to come to faith. You're losing your sight. You've lost a finger. You've lost a leg. Well, that's it. You're going to turn your back on God. God's failed you. He's let you down. Why are you punishing me? Shouldn't have suffering. So I don't want to be a Christian. I met a guy who lost multiple fingers in a tragic accident. And he says, if I had not had that tragic accident, if I had not lost my fingers, there's no way I'd have ever turned to Jesus, because I was in such a mess. I would have never surrendered my own pride and whatever to actually look to God for the source of healing. Not that his fingers grew back, but the sort of the trauma inside. But I'm guessing that's a similar sort of thing for you, that you're losing
Yeah.
your sight, but actually it didn't repel you from God, actually it pulled you towards him.
No, I mean, I think that, a lot of people say, oh, well, why me? Why is this happening to me? And I don't really remember ever asking that, because I guess in my mind I was always like, well, why not me? And there are far worse things than this to deal with. So yeah, I never really questioned it in that way. I mean, I was angry at God at times. Yeah, it was hard to lose my sight, and I won't pretend otherwise. But it was also it was also humbling. It also, yeah, and I guess I'm still learning this lesson in many ways. That, to be humble, carrying that white stick, and as I said to you at the start, it can be quite hard to do that. There's a bit of a stigma attached, but part of that is because, oh, I don't want to be seen to be carrying it. I don't want people to look at me. There's a bit of pride there. So, yeah, having that sight loss has yeah, it has humbled me, and it has helped me ask for help at times, and it has helped me kind of, you'd be grounded in many ways. I'm not saying that that's why God did it, but it certainly helped me to
Mm.
to cope, really, and to cope with Him. And to pray about the things that I'm facing and the struggles that I'm having, and not just the difficulties of finding this place that I'm going to, or walking down the street and not tripping over a bin, or whatever it might be, but also um, coping with sight loss throughout life. Yeah? And I think, obviously I talked about my school life, grew up, got a job, but probably at some point along the journey, I believed that actually someone who's blind probably isn't going to have as good a life as somebody else, and it probably knocked my confidence. And I still wrestle with that today, if I'm honest. I've got a good career. I've really enjoyed my work so far. I've progressed well. I've got wife, family, do lots of different things. So I've got an amazing life. But there's still part of me that's lacks that bit of confidence. Still don't quite believe myself the way that others might. And it's a constant battle, and it is grounding. It is humbling. But yeah, it's also, I progress through that with God, and through that journey. So it's yeah, it can be tough at times. It can be.
moving just right to sort of present day, you've got a
Yep.
wife and children. How do you find navigating life with your wife and children who clearly know that you can't see like other people might? How do you find navigating that with going to church or going to the supermarket? Do your children kind of defend around you? I mean, I sort of how does it work? Just normal day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to explain, I guess, because it's normal to me, I suppose, and they don't know any different. They don't know, what it would be like to have a dad who's fully sighted. So they are great. They do help. They forget sometimes, like everybody else, what children can be like, and leaving Lego on the floor, not great for me. Treading on it, tripping over things, and that can be frustrating at times. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that try my best to cope with it as I can, and they see me, doing that, and I think as well it's important that they are there to help me. But I also I think it's important that they learn teamwork, that they learn that okay, there are certain things that I can't do. I can't drive them to their clubs or whatever it might be. I can't do certain things, but there are other things that I can't do. And actually, one of the things that I've always made me quite sad was kind of reading stories to them at bedtime when they were really young, and finding that quite difficult. But I found a way around that by making up stories and using my imagination, and they loved that. So I was able to do those kind of things as well. But I think it's important that they learn that in life they will meet people who have different situations going on, different maybe disabilities, maybe other things in life, and just learning to operate as a team and play into our strengths. But I also don't want them to necessarily feel or carry the burden of my sight loss. So there's a bit of a balance, if that makes sense.
No, it does. We've all got some sort of obstacle in our life. There's always going to be. When I was first married, I had asthma that could flare up at various times, and Joe had to be
Yep.
quite concerned about that. If food was being made, one of my weird triggers was anything spicy or wholemeal. So Joe was quite good at trying to steer away from that, because if I ate wholemeal food, pasta rice, I was going to have quite a severe asthma attack. So there. We've all got those struggles. But
Yep.
that teamwork thing, that's where having somebody else who can see on your behalf, because I wouldn't think about it. I'd just start eating, or I'd go and play with the cat. And Joe say, you really can't go to that cat because you're going to have a severe allergic reaction. So it was quite helpful to have somebody else looking into what I was doing, because I think in a very similar way, I suppose, in a way, actually, I think I can do things that I shouldn't do. For me, it
Mm.
was, why can't I eat that spicy food? Well, I'm going to have an asthma attack. Why can't I play with a nice cat? Because I'm going to have a severe allergic reaction. And it's that sort of stuff where having somebody else who can say, no, 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 you really shouldn't. It helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And the kids are great. And I think, often I'll be like, getting the bottle of milk out of the fridge and saying, "Oh, is this still in date? Can you check the date for me?" I mean, of course there's apps and technology which can help me read those sorts of things now. Even just a simple old magnifying glass never lets me down as well. So but yeah, no, they're always willing to help. I mean, I guess, also I guess it's too much of a temptation sometimes as children to not use it to their advantage at time, maybe taking an extra biscuit or something like that. Then they think that dad can't see what they're up to. But they're always quite surprised by how much I can hear and how much I know what's going on, even if I can't see what's going on. So yeah, it's good. There's fun things as well.
So if your kids are listening, be careful, because he might not be able to see you, but he can hear you. He can
100%.
sense you in the room.
Yeah.
Let's go to work then. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what the job is, but you're saying technology can help you. So how have you found working? I mean, has your employer helped you? Have they said, well, it's your problem, you fix it, or have they actually been helpful? How do you find technology that actually helps, not hinders you? Because we all work in computers, we're sitting on computers right now. How do
Yeah.
you work with computers when you can't see directly in front of you? How has
Yeah.
technology helped you?
So technology is amazing these days, and it's come a long, long way. So when I first started my career about 20 years ago, I I guess I took a job that was local to me, partly because of the commuting. I didn't really want to, I imagined I couldn't travel into different places on my own. I couldn't travel into London on my own. So I looked for a local job and I took it on, um, and I enjoyed it, but I mean, it was quite funny. Really, my first job was I was keying different forms. So people, when they needed to fill out certain paperwork, would send it to me. It would land on my desk, and I'd have to key it into a computer, which is perhaps one of the least accessible things that a blind person can do. But I was there working with a magnifying glass and keying in these forms into the computer. I work for the public sector, and so there's really good equality laws around all of that. So helping to supply equipment and things like that can help people have reasonable adjustments in their jobs really, really important. Um, Back then when I started, and so typically all my career has all been kind of an office-based job. So yeah, working at computers. But back when I started, a typical computer wasn't especially accessible, and accessibility wasn't really even a thing that they thought that much about. So I'd have to, we as an organization, or me at home as an individual, would have to buy additional software which would zoom into the screen, or a screen reader that would read out what's on the screen to you to make it work. Um, these days, it's very, very different. So I could sit down now at pretty much any computer, and trigger accessibility features that are built into it to make it workable. It might not be perfect. Sometimes there's value in buying these extra specialist pieces of software or equipment, but typically now, yeah, the equipment comes with accessibility built in. Windows or Apple machines, or whatever computer you prefer, you have got all these kind of features that are already built into the software. You just have to know how to turn them on. And yeah, particularly things like smartphones as well. A piece of glass, no buttons, nothing you can touch or feel, for a blind person was horrendous when it came out. And of course, you remember the old fashioned mobile phones with actually tactile buttons you could feel,
Yeah.
and blind people would use those. But yeah, when smartphones came along, it sort of changed the game. But thankfully, some smart cookie somewhere invented speech software that would enable you to touch the screen on the smartphone. It would read out to you what was on the screen, and you could touch it and double tap it to make it activate. So um, essentially now I can use a regular computer, a regular smartphone, turn on the accessibility features, and I can do these things, and read my email, send messages, work on spreadsheets, whatever it might be that I'm doing, much as anyone else can. A little bit differently. I have to squint and put my face right close to the screen to be able to see it. But yeah, generally it's come an awful long way, and that technology has made an incredible difference. And with the invention of AI and all these new apps on smartphones, you can do so much now that you couldn't even imagine doing, even 10 years ago, let alone today. So it's come an awful long way.
Cool. So somebody's just been given their first diagnosis from a doctor, basically saying you're going to lose your sight. Whether it's 50%, 80%, 100%
Yeah.
sight loss. What's your advice? How do you, as somebody who's navigated this from the age of 10, 12 years old,
Yeah.
how do you help them not just sit in terror and thinking that's the end of my life?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, losing your sight is traumatic. There's no two ways about it, and it is hard. And I think I would say to someone, look, there are going to be tough days ahead. There are going to be hard things that you're going to have to face, and you're going to have to find new ways of doing things. And I think I'd probably say a couple of things. Firstly, I'd say, give yourself time to grieve, because we need to grieve. It is a loss. We call it sight loss for a reason. And it is a loss because it changes everything that you do, everything from making a cup of tea through to, your job, your career, walking your children down the aisle. And if you've got, that's something that my wife and I and our family, I think, one day I might walk one of my children down the aisle, and that's that's going to be quite tough. Am I going to be able to see what I'm doing? Am I going to be able to see my daughter in her wedding dress? These are all things that you start to think about, and that are losses. And you genuinely have to grieve them, and that can take time. So I would certainly encourage people to give themselves time. But I think I'd also say don't lose hope, because there is so much technology available today, so much support, and there are ways that you can live. There are ways that you can do things, and it might feel hard, or it might require learning new skills. But I would encourage people not to lose hope. It isn't the end of the world. It is difficult. It's hard. It's a journey. Lots of things to learn. But you can still have a great life. And like I say, that when I grew up, at some point along the way, I convinced myself that perhaps I wouldn't have as good a life as somebody else because of my sight loss, but that is just untrue. It's just a lie, plain and simple. You can have an amazing life. It can be hard, and it can certainly be really isolating if you don't live with friends, if you don't live with family, if you're on your own. It can be really, really difficult. But there are a lot of organisations out there who can offer help and support. So give yourself time, give yourself space. And I think the other thing I mentioned about grieving your sight loss, I think as well, there will be different stages in life when you encounter new things, where you never even thought that having sight loss would affect it. But for example, I came to terms with my sight loss to a greater or lesser degree, and then I met my wife and we got married. And then she's fully sighted, so she too had to go through a bit of a grieving process as well, because I guess anyone grows up imagining what their future might be like, and of course having met me, having having sight loss, and that changes how life might go. So she had to come to terms with that, just like we've talked about my children coming to terms with that as well. So we're not kind of living in isolation, we're not islands, and it takes time for ourselves, but for other people as well, just to, to adjust and learn. But like I say, my underlying message is that, you can have a good life, you can have hope. So just learn those skills, talk to people, tell them how you're feeling, and get in touch with the organisations that can really help support you through that.
People like Torch Trust, who I know we've spoken about between us. We were at their HQ not long ago. People like that will help you, regardless of what your sight loss may be for you, whether it's full loss, partial loss, whether it's perhaps you've got great vision, but your brain just isn't processing the information. There's a massive wide spectrum of stuff. But people like Torch Trust, who can help. I know when I spoke to Trevor Stammers, they were a lifeline for him. He met someone quite almost, I suppose, God instantly. But they gave him some aids because he suddenly went for how to make a cup of tea. I can't see the mug. I can't see the kettle. How do I not scald myself? Where, we can probably get a tea bag into a mug if we close our eyes, but boiling water into a cup and where your hand is, I can probably fairly accurately do it, but I wouldn't want to do it blind. And he had that, but his was, I think if I remember rightly, he knew he was probably going to get it back. He hoped, but it went from fully sighted to fully not. And that is quite traumatic, but there are things that will help you.
Yeah. And I think if you, like I say, if you wake up one morning, open your eyes and you suddenly can't see, the panic and the fear you must feel in that moment, think, oh, how am I going to do, anything? Because, we grow up in a sighted world. Everything's set up to be sighted generally. And we do, we rely on our sight probably more so than any of our other senses. Maybe you can ask Angela Jackson about that, but, generally we rely on our sight massively. So even simple tasks, like you say, making a cup of tea, to do without sight suddenly becomes a real challenge. But I would say that actually, chances are you're not the first person in the world to lose their sight. So you can talk to people who have gone ahead of you and say, well, actually, there is a level cup indicator, which is a little device you can put in your cup and it will beep when the water gets to the top of the cup. Now, if you're not blind and have no experience of sight loss, you've not even thought of such a little device, but just something as simple as that can allow you to make that cup of tea. And as I say, but you only know what you know. If you've never encountered sight loss before, you'll have never heard of any devices that can make things like that work for you. So if anyone finds themselves in that situation, do reach out to there's a number of charities around that can help support you, and can help coach you through doing life in a different way. And that's how I see it, really. It's not that I live less life, I just live it differently. So I can make a cup of tea, and I knock the cup over at times and make a big mess, and it's frustrating, and I make myself it makes me angry at times, and I feel angry with myself because I've done it. I knock over a cup that I put there myself or where someone else has put there. But and I think but there's lots of little hints and tricks and things that you can get used to, little clips that you can clip your socks together, so when you're doing your washing, you haven't got to worry about trying to pair up socks. Are these the right color? Do these match? I've got a glass of water here, but it's not clear glass, it's green glass, so it's easier to see. Just little things like that you wouldn't necessarily think of until you're in that situation. And others who've gone before you, chances are, will have thought of something that can make it easier, or make it, enable you to do it. So yeah, don't yeah, I'd really encourage people not to panic. It's easy to say, but you can do things, and you can learn how to operate in a different way.
And Andy, thank you. I know this is, I mean, it's quite a vulnerable thing to say. I can't see very well. I guess holding a white stick, in a sense, is yes, I have a need, but I guess in another sense, we all have a need, and we all carry around a white stick of
Yep.
sorts in some way. But we do like our independence, don't we? We don't like people to know we can't.
Yep,
Um,
100%.
and I think
Yeah,
it
an
takes
independent.
bravery.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, it does, and I think I listen to podcasts with blind people, and they talk about their own experiences, and it's amazing how often you hear the same kinds of stories. When I first started, it took a lot for me to use the white cane first of all, and then when I would get home, when I turned into my street, I pack it up and put it in my bag, so none of my neighbours saw me with it. These are the things that we do because we don't want to be seen to be having to use a white cane, and I use it more so to let other people know that I might not be able to see so well, rather than for my own navigation, because my sight is such that I can generally see enough to get around okay. But even so, if there's ice on the floor, or a sign or something that I wasn't expecting, the cane gives me that kind of a warning. But it does, like you say, we want independence, but and it's a level of independence is good, but actually, we're all dependent on each other in one way or another. So, yeah, it's learning to work together. Like, it's that teamwork thing again, isn't it? And I'm always, I was always quite terrified going into London on my own with a white stick, thinking, oh, well, what if I get lost? What if this? What if that? But I was really surprised, and maybe I shouldn't have been. Maybe I haven't got enough faith in people, but I was really surprised that actually quite often someone will come up to me and say, do you need any help? Can I offer you any assistance? Just members of the public, not necessarily staff or police officers or anything like that, although they do too. But just general members of the public. Do you need a hand? Can I do anything to help you? And that does restore your faith in people, because it's great to see that.
Fab. Andy, thank you. I think we have to just very briefly touch on 90s tunes, the highlight of your life, regardless of what
Absolutely.
Alpha has gone on.
Yeah.
Love to Helen, but 90s tunes. How have you found that? Because you came from never doing radio to doing it. It's a brilliant show, and if anybody listened, they would have no concept that you couldn't see, which is
Yep.
kind of the point about something you've said, and we said at the start, and I touched on it a little bit. It isn't necessarily obvious.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, again, because I've learned to use a computer in my way now, with a magnifier, screen readers, and all kinds of things like that. I can get around technology quite well. The software we use for the radio station, I can use the magnifier on the laptop, and I can use it that way. I do have a little bit of an issue where, if I'm trying to watch the time, in terms of how long I've got left in terms of a segment, and I lean in a bit too close, I headbutt the microphone, which can be not a pleasant sound for the listener. But yeah, the good thing about, obviously, it's just learning to operate that software and learning to do it my way. But yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's talking, and it's clicking a button to start and stop doing that, really. So I don't mean to make it sound easy, because I know there's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, using the software, using the technology that lets me zoom in and see what I'm doing, and adjusting the sound, and all kinds of things like that make that possible. So yeah, and like I say, I try not to, I don't hide my problems with my sight, but I also try not to make it the central thing. In many ways, sight loss can define you as a person, and perhaps it shouldn't. But when people see you walking down the street with a white cane, it's what they think. But like I say, people don't listen to 90s tunes because I'm blind. They listen to 90s tunes, hopefully, because of the music and the content and the entertainment. So like I say, I don't refuse to talk about my blindness on air, but it also doesn't always come up. So yeah, they wouldn't necessarily know that that's the case.
I guess you could say that yes, it has defined something of who you are, but it doesn't define all of who you are.
Yeah, yeah. That's absolutely right. And like I say, the the sense of humility that it's created in me sometimes, and needing to ask for help when I really didn't want to, and these are all things that play into our character. And I guess we're all a product of the journey that we've been on. So what kind of a person would we be if we hadn't gone through certain things? And it's a question we can't know. But yeah, it is certainly the sight loss is an important part of my life. And if people were to ask me about my life story, I would clearly need to mention it to give it context. But yeah, like you say, it isn't necessarily the central thing, but it certainly plays. It has a huge impact in my life. There's no two ways about it.
Andy Brown, thank you for sharing some of that, your life, your faith,
You're very
and
welcome.
how you've navigated life with losing sight, which I think for most people is probably one of their worst nightmares. Things that we don't want to ever happen. Losing our sight's probably high up on the list, and yet you've done it with grace and you've got through it, and it's been hard, but you've still come through that. And we're very grateful for you on Pure with 90s Tunes, because it's great, and it's a real example of, do you know what? Sight loss doesn't have to define what you can achieve. You can even be a presenter on Pure 24/7 radio.
Absolutely, the pinnacle. No, thank you very much. It's been really good to share my story, and I hope it's if anyone's listening who's going through sight loss, then I really hope that this has encouraged them to know that anything's possible almost. And yeah, it is hard, and it will take some adjustment, but there is hope as well, and that's really the central message of what I wanted to get across today. So I hope I've done that.
Very much so. Andy Brown, thank you.
Thank you.